God the Father. Today it is simply taken for granted that the supreme creative power of the universe is male, just as Michelangelo illustrated. Man is made in God's image, and women are made from a rib of Adam, which is a belief that requires a lot of faith because nowhere in the physical world is this phenomenon seen. It is women who give birth, but the idea that God may be feminine is, in some circles, heresy. In the 60s and 70s, women began making inroads into academia, and their research of early civilizations subsequently challenged this very male view of religion. Scholars began publishing books uncovering the history of the divine feminine. Most controversial was Lithuanian-born Marija Gimbutys. As professor of European archaeology at UCLA, and after she had written more than a dozen books on the Bronze Age, she authored several groundbreaking books on Neolithic Old Europe and their gods and goddesses. The goddess hypothesis suggests that before today's patriarchal monotheists, there were polytheists, like the Greeks and Romans, who believed that divinity was represented both as gods and goddesses. And prior to the Greeks and Romans, Neolithic people apparently believed that the divine creative force was primarily feminine, as evidenced by the fact that at the beginning of nearly every civilization, the predominant images were small statues of women made of clay, stone, and ivory. Sitting proudly with their hands on their hips and sporting crowns, these were women of stature, not women as chattel. Gimbutys wrote that these early societies may have been matrilineal, egalitarian, cooperative communities who honored the sacredness of the feminine, but indeed not to the exclusion of the masculine. Furthermore, she believed that in many ways the Neolithic was just a continuation of the earlier Paleolithic. I wanted to see all these figures together in one place to make a better assessment, so I made a goddess timeline. Many timelines visually distort time by elongating some eras and minimizing others. I divided time into equal 1,000 years segments, beginning at 30,000 BC and ending at 2000 AD. I painted a nice background and researched all the archaeological images from different civilizations. I then positioned them at their proper places in time. There were so many I had to create side pages for Old Europe, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. On the main page, reading left to right, I have placed the different countries and locations, and at the bottom are the different eras. We really must begin with an overview of the Paleolithic figures. Around 30,000 BCE, humans began expressing themselves through art. Most were representations of animals. But of human representation, most were these figures that scientists labeled Venuses. Now, were they goddesses, fertility cult idols, dolls, Paleolithic pornography, or just ordinary women? Some certainly do appear to be pregnant, but others just appear to be images of slender young women. Actually, many of the Paleolithic Venuses appear to be older women, especially the ones from Russia. So, in the Paleolithic, It would seem that all aspects of a woman's life were being represented, rather like the pagan maiden, mother, and crone. Many have pondered what these images may have represented. Russian archaeologist Zia Abramova says, because of the overwhelming number of female figures, early hunting societies were women-centered. She felt that the images may have been seen more as clan mothers than goddesses. But Alexander Marshak says about this large carved figure, this is the beginning of the mythic mother. Obviously awed by the creative powers of the mother, the artist has given her a horned mask and emphasized the lines that describe her body in some places as many as 3 times. As we move from the Paleolithic to the present, we see threads appearing. Threads are images that have similar characteristics that weave their way through time and appear on similar images in different civilizations. Some of these characteristics even appear on images made at nearly the same time, but on opposite sides of the world. Like, for example, Demeter of Greece with her snakes, and the Aztec Quetzalcoatl who has become the snake. Many of these characteristics originate in the Paleolithic, but later, as language develops, they become associated with the names of goddesses. And here are some of the threads I've noticed. Women as keepers of the hearth, the moon, and how women's bodies may have taught humans to count and conceive of time. Women, goddesses, and animals as they appear as birds, cats and lions, cows, snakes and scorpions. The first thread is women as keepers of the hearth, and it starts with this Paleolithic statue of the old women found in Russia. These figures were made when the Earth was in the midst of an ice age and massive glaciers covered the northern hemisphere, and the Earth's climate was cold and dry. Nomadic groups of humans roamed along the edges of the glaciers from the Pyrenees to Siberia, tracking and hunting the woolly mammoth. The Russian settlements of Kostenki and Avdivo gave archaeologists a rare opportunity to find a collection of these figures in situ, complete with contextual information. These people constructed pit huts and houses made of mammoth bone. Inside, ritualistically buried in storage pits, constructed like smaller houses, and subsequently near the hearths, were small figures of old women, their breasts and bellies sagging from childbirth and age. Some were even buried together. And at Kostenki, vulvas made of soft marl stone were shattered near the fires. These old women seemed to be staking their claim to hearth and home. In this century, when ethnographers began recording the cultures of the indigenous tribes of Russia, they found that they lived much like their Paleolithic ancestors. Could they give us clues to the meaning of these figures? In the Evanek tribe, the oldest and most widespread word for shaman was utanja. It refers to women shaman, fire women, and women of the hearth. In the Tungus tribe, they believe that the spirit of the hearth takes the form of a clever old woman whose portrait is stored in each tent. And the Samoyeds refer to the fire as Old Grandmother Fire, guardian of the tent. In Old Europe, Yugoslavia, around 5500 BC, the thread continues with this statue I call Lady of the House. Similar shrine models were found buried under temples. In this particular one, her neck and head become the chimney. The roof, her shoulders, which is adorned with a necklace. She has literally become the sacred hearth, home, and temple. On the Eurasian steppes around 600 BC, the Sarmatians, who would later blend with the Scythians, buried their dead in mounds called kurgans. Archaeologist Janine Davis Kimball found that the central burial figures often were hearthwomen, gives further credence to the speculation that they were a matriarchal society. Later, in Greece, round temples, mimicking the shape of the hearth, were built to the goddess Hestia. These were important temples. They were considered the hearth and the heart of the community, where individual citizens could rekindle their own home fires. Later, the Romans renamed her Vesta, and the Vestal Virgins were responsible for keeping the fires alive on pain of death. The thread ends when the Romans invade Britain and bring their gods and goddesses to mingle with the indigenous deities. This image may be Bridget, the goddess of the hearth. So, we start with a small, humble figure, ritually buried in hearth and home, which finally flowers into an institution honoring a feminine characteristic as sacred, hence the goddess. The moon and how women's bodies may have taught humans to count and conceive of time. Alexander Marshak says, humans began charting and recording the movements of the moon as early as the Paleolithic. He studied notches made on early pieces of ivory and bone and found that they seemed to coincide with phases of the moon. In many indigenous cultures, women live collectively, which brings about menstrual synchrony. This is when women's menses become synchronized with each other and to the rhythm of the moon. Paleo-Siberian tribal women were the keepers of the moon calendars, and they could accurately track the duration of pregnancy. Some moon calendars used counting sticks. And Marshak directs our attention to these notched sticks, which have feminine characteristics. He believes that the notches represented counting, and the pendants were probably worn by women who identified with the fact that their bodies counted and marked time. Next is the Venus of La Salle, who holds a crescent horn, notched 13 times, the same number of moons in a lunar year. 13 is also the day of a woman's cycle when she can become pregnant. Her other hand rests on her swelling belly. The knowledge of how to count and track the duration of a pregnancy using the cycles of the moon would be invaluable to Paleolithic women because it could facilitate the planning and survival of Paleolithic women during the arduous journey into childbirth. Scientists say that La Salle was a ceremonial site. Was it also a meeting place for women to learn this knowledge? This thread continues to the island of Malta, 4000 BC, where exists one of the first stone temples ever built, and it's built in the shape of a woman's body which tells time. At the summer and winter solstice and the spring and autumn equinox, the sun's rays enter through the goddess's vulva and registers on the back walls. This temple is one of the world's first astronomical calendars. Also found at Malta is this statue of a woman in the birthing position with 9 marks on her back, which is the same number of moons during a human pregnancy. Similar sorts of earth structures are found from this megalithic big stone period. This one is found in Ireland at Newgrange, where the sun's rays penetrate the darkness of this womb tomb on the winter solstice. Today, there is a renewed interest in trying to understand the meaning of these large megaliths. At any rate, this thread starts with a small feminine counting stick and ends with huge megalithic structures built to honor the feminine body as a way of counting time. Women goddesses as animals. Moving through the images of the goddess, we find her depicted with animals, particularly birds, lions and cats, cows, snakes and scorpions. Birds. Some say that this Paleolithic wall carving could be the first time the feminine is mixed with a hint of bird. Later in Old Europe, her neck elongates, her face becomes a beak, and she offers her breasts as nourishment. Her arms sometimes appear as small wings, or she wears the mask of a duck, sporting a crown, sitting with her hands on her hips as if she's an animated storyteller. In megalithic France, the owl goddess greets the dead at the entrance of a burial chamber. In Egypt, she takes full flight as her arms curl around her long neck and beaked head. And later she becomes the more formal Isis, wearing her hieroglyph, the throne, on her head. This is the throne from which all kings ruled. In Mesopotamia, she is Inanna or Ishtar and has large wings. She holds the rod and circle of measurement and wears the horns of consecration. She is standing on 2 lions and flanked by owls. Then there is Baal, here seated on a throne of geese. In the Minoan culture of Crete is a calcite carving of Artemis. She has horns and is surrounded by winged creatures. The Etruscans give us their version of Artemis, and in Greece she is called Nike, or winged victory. Aphrodite rides on her goose and holds the sprout of regeneration and new life. Athena on one side of the coin, and her favorite pet, the owl, on the other. The bird goddess thread begins in the Paleolithic with a simple concept and travels widely to become a highly sophisticated image. Lions and cats. Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, now Turkey, is one of the first cities. Cats are played with and sat on. In fact, the first time we see someone sitting on the now famous lion throne, it is rather a large woman, and they are lionesses. In the land of Canaan, the priestesses of Ishtar wore necklaces bearing her image, shown here holding gazelles and snakes while standing on a lion. In Egypt, the lion goddess, Sekhmet, is seated on a throne. Her smaller counterpart, the goddess Bast, is shown as a woman with a cat's head, kittens at her feet, playing a sistrum, or she is simply a cat, complete with earrings and necklaces. In India, the goddess Durga, with 10 arms, masters the technique of riding a lion while battling her enemies. And in Greece, Cybele continues the tradition of the lion throne, but now they appear to have manes. Cows. One of the earliest pieces of artwork is found in France, at Cheval Cave, from around 30,000 BC. The feminine is entwined with a lioness and a cow. It is hard to discern whether the cow is male or female, since both have horns. In Mesopotamia, Inanna and Ishtar's headdress is adorned with divine horns, as is her male consorts. In Egypt, Hathor is represented 2 ways: as a woman with a headdress of horns which holds the sun, or simply as a cow. The Minoan civilization on the island of Crete displays the sacred horns of consecration, and increasingly horns become associated with male power. However, in Europe, shadows of the horned goddesses were reflected in medieval costumes. In later textiles of Greece and the Balkans, historian Mary B. Kelly shows how the women still embroidered the old designs of Lady of the Beasts and the horned goddesses of the Tree of Life. Snakes and scorpions. Scorpions are fierce mothers. This early Mesopotamian plate from the Samara culture shows them surrounding a circle of women with flowing hair. In Egypt, Selket is seen with a scorpion on her head, protecting the tomb of King Tut, or she has a scorpion's body. Nekbet, the vulture goddess, and Wadjet, the snake goddess, were worn on King Tut's headdress for protection. Here are the famous snake goddesses of the Minoan culture of Crete. In Greece, Demeter holds snakes for transformation, poppies for medicine, and wheat for sustenance. Our symbol for medicine comes from the Greeks. In early societies, snakes were seen as symbols of regeneration and healing. They renew themselves by shedding their skins. Athena wears snakes coiled like ringlets around her neck. Another appears from behind her shield. The goddess makes her way to Gotland, wielding snakes as she sits in the birthing position, ready to replenish and rejuvenate this human species. The Aztec snake-headed Quetzalcoatl is called the Mother of the Gods, and Exchel, the goddess of childbirth and medicine, wears a snake as a headdress. The North American Hopewell Indians constructed an earthwork known as the Serpent Mound, and it marks the summer solstice, but in addition, it marks the full moons as they rise and set. Were they marking times for human conception? Was there a connection with their southern Aztec neighbors and Exchel and her snake? But the meaning of the snake would change. And why? And where is the goddess now? Well, her accoutrements have been transferred to the Madonna. In Oxford, England, Sophia is portrayed as the mother. She wears a crown, sits on the lion's throne, flanked by lionesses, and holding the sprout of new life, upon which her bird is perched. This Mother Madonna is cradled in a moon, and her winged creatures are now angels that carry her crown. As the Immaculate Conception, she stands on the moon, and the meaning of the snake image has changed. Angels hold the sprout of flowers, and the bird, now a dove, hovers over her head. Ian Begg, in The Cult of the Black Virgin, states that at the time of the Crusades, original pagan statues were brought back from the East by returning warriors, and they were seen as Madonnas. Maybe the darkness of Artemis referred to the dark of the moon or the darkness of the earth, and it is easy to see how the statues of Isis and Horus from Egypt could easily have been seen as Mary and Jesus. And lastly, we see the Madonna, moon, snake, and bird, this time encased in the ultimate symbol of the goddess, the vulva. Even though Mary was relegated to the back of the spiritual bus, and the goddess a fertility figure, it was the research of 20th century scholars in women's spirituality that gave contemporary women knowledge about their vast history of the sacred feminine. For many women, the idea that they too are made in the image of the divine empowers them and gives them the ability to move in their lives with more confidence.